Grenada, a land of breathtaking beauty and unwavering spirit. It has a story to tell, a story of resilience. Throughout its tumultuous history, Grenada has faced adversity with courage and determination. From the echoes of colonialism to the winds of change that swept across its shores, the Grenadian people have endured, adapted, and thrived.
Now, as it relates to the history, this island is well known for its many parallels. Several events that occurred in the 18th and 19th century mirror several defining moments of the 20th century to the exact date. As we make our way towards the period 1979 to 1983, the revolution and its aftermath, it is important that we step back and bring together those many parallels that make the history of this island so interesting and so unique.
You know, we see ourselves as the island of conflict. Not that I think that we're more conflicted than any other island, but we have that perception of ourselves that we've had a turbulent history at every stage. You know, Leapers Hill, Fedon's Rebellion, 1951 when we had the Sky Red with Eric Gary and stuff. The revolution, we can point to these points where we've had these big events take place that have made us question, you know, the cohesiveness, I think, of the society.
Grenada has had 3 revolutions. There's a saying that we little but we talawa, you know. We have had quite a tumultuous history. We've had the 1795 rebellion with Fedon, 1951 social revolution with Eric Gary, and I guess the most popular, the 1979 socialist revolution. The 1795 revolution, there's always a controversy as to whether it was a slave rebellion or not, and I guess it has to do with how it happened. Grenada would have been colonized by British and French coming first.
Grenada is conquered by France in 1779. So the 1763 Constitution is suspended and Grenada is ruled by France for 4 years to 1783. This parallels by 200 years the events of 1979 to 1983.
In the early hours of Tuesday, March 13th, 1979, a movement against one of the region's longest-serving leaders, Eric Matthew Gary, finally found expression in an armed assault on the country's army headquarters. 34-year-old lawyer-politician Maurice Bishop, at the head of a revolutionary army, had created a precedent in the Commonwealth Caribbean, the overthrow of an elected government by armed revolt.
We believe that this is truly a victory for the people of Grenada. The broadest masses of our people, workers, farmers, fishermen, agricultural workers indeed, the youths in particular, the women, the middle classes in general, were all involved one way or another in this particular struggle. We see it as being truly a revolutionary upheaval.
Let us now return to the period 1779 to 1783.
As the theatrics played out on the international stage between Britain and France, Grenada, like any other Caribbean island, was caught up in the back and forth. The Brits took over by 1763, and then there's another back and forth again, French getting back Grenada, British coming back by 1783. What that did was to cause conflict among the free-colored population. Under French rule, they had a lot more freedoms that they did not have with British rule. So Julian Fedon would have been a French planter of mixed birth, white father, black mother. and would have owned one of the largest estates at the time, Belvedere. And once British rule comes back into Grenada by 1783, himself and a number of the other free colors found themselves in a situation where they were asked to pledge their allegiance to Britain. But it was not just pledging their allegiance. Yes, they had financial power, but their political power was restricted. Social powers were restricted. You have churches being changed from being Catholic now to being Anglican.
And that commandeering of the then Roman Catholic Church here on Church Street was done in quite an overt manner.
The next Sunday then, the British came for worship and they found the Catholic Church locked. So what did they do? They had a contingent of the militia. They broke the door down and proceeded to throw out all the sacred ritual objects sacred to Roman Catholics and throw them into the churchyard and proceeds to hold a service under military guard. That church still remains an Anglican church, right? That's St. George's Anglican Church. And that is the beginning of the repression of the French Roman Catholics. So they said, look, all your births, that's baptisms, burials, and marriages, they are all invalid unless they are solemnized before a Protestant minister.
Because of all of this, Fedon and others thought it was time to rebel against Britain. Of course, they would have had the backing of the Haitian Revolution, seeing what happened in Haiti, similar situations taking place in St. Lucia, with the French radicals moving into the other islands of the French Caribbean. So there's this connection between Grenada and what's happening. For example, the French anthem was being sung in Grenada in 1795. No, I won't sing. I won't sing it. But it was actually being sung at the time. So Fedon does something different. He's a plantation owner. He frees his enslaved and encourages them to be part of the rebellion. So that's how it gets that twist into being a slave rebellion. At the end of the day, he holds the country for about a year. Britain got very worried. They thought this is Haiti #2 happening in the Caribbean, so they were very concerned as to what happened. One of the things about the revolution that makes it very bloody is that Fedon would have lined up about 47 people and executed them, including the governor at the time, Governor Ninian Hume. Unfortunately for Grenada, we're going to see this happening again in 1983, similar sort of situation where the persons in charge are executed. At least 7,000 slaves lost their lives in this conflict because eventually Britain takes over. Quite a number of the free colors would have lost their lives.
In October of 1795, Victor Hughes, who was the chieftain of the French Revolution in the Eastern Caribbean, he sends a general and civil administrators to arrest Fedon and send him to Guadeloupe to be tried. It matches almost the same time, October of 1795, October of 1983. Grenada is rife with these repetitions of events and developments.
Fedon was never found. So there's this wonderful legend that he escaped, and you would see this white horse traveling through the countryside with Fedon on it. It became part of the myth. Yeah. Later on in the 79 revolution, Fedon is idealized as a freedom fighter and someone who would have tried to get freedom for the enslaved. So there's that connection between Fedon and Grenada's third revolution.
When the French releases Grenada in 1783, the British Parliament in Grenada passes a law which reinstates all of the laws which were passed by the original Grenada legislature from 1762 until 1779. Another similar thing happened in 1983, 1984, right?
The revolution is significant in the 1790s because it's a period of revolution throughout the region. And Grenada is part of that whole process of revolution. And the influence of course, the French Revolution and the ideas of freedom and liberty and equality and all of that, and the enslaved being a part of this whole process, Grenada is part of that whole movement towards revolution at the time.
As we progress towards the 20th century and the death of the revolution, it is important that we consider an important political figure, T.A. Marichaux.
He was the managing editor of the West Indian newspaper. He is beginning agitation and there's activism against British rule, and he's arguing the West Indies must be West Indian, and all through his papers he's discussing these issues. That period of 1937, which occurs exactly 100 years after emancipation, Grenada is dead quiet in 1937, 1938. No protests, no nothing. And Marichaux, to his credit, he had a rally in support of the other workers in the Anglophone Caribbean who were rising in revolt against British rule, basically. So even though Grenada did not have that militancy in the 1930s, Marichaux made sure that that did not go unnoticed. Now, it is said that Marichaux got Gary interested in Grenadian affairs. And they all have similar things. They have things which come in common, right? Marichaux was, well, Grenadian, of course, but Marichaux went to Aruba. Now, Aruba is extremely important in the modern history of Grenada because Maurice Bishop was born there, right? And then there is a large amount of to and fro working in the army, in the oil refineries and so on. He meets Gary and encourages Gary to become interested in Grenadian affairs, right?
You have TA in the forefront of a march towards Government House and saying to the governor, listen here, this is not working, yeah? So you have him at the front of that, basically asking for representation. The difference between TA and Gary was TA was willing to ask for changes within the context of a British government. Gary was asking for changes outside of that box. We can manage this for ourselves if we don't need you. Yeah, that's the difference between the two. So TA is saying, okay, we have a legislative council. Let's say, for example, there are 10 persons on this legislative council that you have nominated. I am now asking you to shift that 10 so that it will now be 6 persons that we can elect, and you still have 4 that you can nominate. So we're sharing this power with me getting a little bit more, but not a break with. Yeah? And that would have been the difference between the two. TA is also very much for the idea of federation. The idea that we need to come together as a group, form a federation of the Caribbean. But again, with Britain still having that umbrella oversea, look over. And in that way, Gary is a bit more radical in the sense that he's saying, listen, we need to just break with this thing. Yeah? That colonial connection is not necessarily working for us anymore. TA is asking for changes in the Legislative Council, which gives a majority to an elected group as opposed to a nominated group. Yet, he does not take it from there to asking for improvements in wages, in living conditions, in working conditions for the ordinary worker. Gary does that. That's the difference, yeah? TA is more on the level of dealing with just the issue of government, but not getting down to the grassroots. And that's the difference between the two. Gary gets down to the grassroots. And I think also understanding that if you get into the grassroots, you form trade unions, you are going to probably get more support. Yep. And Gary now does it at a time when he gets the trade union power, but we also get universal adult suffrage. So he takes advantage of that now to get himself into politics. So you can see one sort of laying the groundwork for the other. Because TA is the one who's saying the system needs to change. We need to move out of Crown Colony into a gradual form of representation. Gary takes it one step further. By the time Gary comes around, we have now slowly moving out of Crown Colony, slowly moving into more representative. And by the time Gary gets here, we are now at universal adult suffrage. So he takes that opportunity. He pushes the union where you get the grassroots support of people. And once you have that support, you now change that, use that to form your political party. And you get your base now to be able to run government. So they affect each other, but TA kind of lays the foundation that Gary is able to build on. And that I see as the link between the two of them, definitely. And fast forward to the 1950s. The rest of the region had its 1930s upheaval from Jamaica, Trinidad, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, St. Kitts. Everyone was up in arms in the 1930s. That didn't happen in Grenada. Our 1930s was basically 1950 with the coming of Eric Gary. And the revolutions, if you want to call them that, or riots and rebellions of the 1930s, had a lot to do with persons coming to the realization that they were being victimized by the British government. Colonization meant that, okay, so period of slavery has ended, at least 100 years has passed, but people do not have political rights as they would have liked to have political rights. They did not have rights as workers as they should have. And of course, persons who would have gone off and served Britain in the World War, they're coming back and recognizing, but there's certain freedoms that we don't have in the Caribbean. So you had quite a number of persons coming onto the regional stage and fighting for those changes. In Grenada's case, that happens in 51 with Gary.
During that period, the 1950s, early 60s, Grenada was predominantly an agricultural society. You had large estates, and Grenada was a major exporter of nutmegs, cocoa, bananas. And most of the workers were involved in the agricultural sector.
Grenada was predominantly black working class. Many of the laborers were working under very, very oppressive conditions.
Basically, Grenada was being ruled what you call by absentee owners. And on the estate, the wage or increase in salary was there more than for 50 years. He had not moved. So people on the estates, it was basically an agrarian society. So people on the estates were working long hours. For matter of fact, the older people would say that they work sometimes 12 hours, have to reap their fruits, sometimes with masanto or with torch, working on the estate. The main crops then was banana only came in after Janet. Janet was in 1955 when we had our hurricane. So the main crop there was cocoa and nutmeg. Particularly harvesting the cocoa, people would then used to go and have to harvest to make sure that they harvest the cocoa in time, and it used to be 12 hours. So there came this man out of Aruba, born in Dunfermline, St. Andrew, named Eric Gary. He landed here in 1949.
Gary would have been a teacher, and he would have migrated, gone off to Aruba and worked with the oil companies there and had connections with trade union movements then. So he comes back to Grenada, and he is now the voice of the oppressed and those persons who did not necessarily have a voice.
And he, seeing the plight of the workers on the estate, decided to organize the union.
Workers' rights were at the minimal in Grenada, especially for agricultural workers. And that's where Eric Gary, he being from the countryside, he decided to start a union for agricultural workers to advocate for wages and holidays and vacation pay and things like that. And he was not accepted by the plantocracy and the government because he was considered radical. Actually, he was even branded communist, of course, at that time. Everybody that did not toe the line was communist because of what was going on in the world. So Eric Gairy was able to bring a lot of people along, because that was probably the largest group of Grenadians who had not really experienced the progress society had made since the end of slavery. They were still on these plantations, they were living in barrack-type environments, very poor. Some of them were still living in housing conditions that you would deem not that much improved from the era of slavery and right after. So Gairy basically appealed to that group, and I guess you can link Gairy to Bradshaw and Eric Williams and some of the other leaders across the region that were doing similar things, you know, in their respective islands. So Gairy was able to get a real support from this mass of people, and some of it were urban workers as well.
And became very popular representing the workers on those estates, calling for better conditions and increase in wages. And he became very effective.
So in organizing them into union, it was a laughing matter because many others had tried before, and so the estate owners didn't take him seriously. But he actually did organize them.
Gairy was asking for wage increases. He was asking for 46% increase in wages. He was asking for better working conditions, things like holidays with pay, something that never happened before. If you got sick, there was no such thing as sick leave. If you got ill, you just didn't get paid. So sick leave, holidays with pay, things like that is what he was asking for.
And when he made demand on the owners for increased pay or better working condition, they didn't take him seriously.
So in 1951, Gairy decided he was going to instigate some strike actions because he was not getting the response. They didn't want to recognize his union as the representative of these agricultural workers and others. So he staged a demonstration, and the show of force basically they got the plantocracy and stuff. They got scared. 3
persons actually lost their lives, and this happened in the parish of St. David.
Gairy was arrested by I think it was the acting governor at the time. The governor had gone, the lieutenant governor had left the island for something. So they arrested Gairy.
It was said that he went to Carriacou, but word is that the ship remained just off the coast of Grenada for a number of days and kept him captive on that ship. And I believe that heralded Eric Gairy as the champion of the working class, and then he was then taken seriously.
His supporters went crazy, in a sense. They went wild. In a sense, they basically demanded that he would be released. And they went attacking plantations and burning. And that's where the Sky Red comes from, is the places that were set on fire. And in the end, police came in. I think maybe some even came from Barbados and some of the different islands to quell the protest that was going on. And 3 people were killed. In St. David's, there's actually a monument to them, in Latante, I think it is, to those people that were killed when confronted by the police and stuff. And in the end, the governor came back and he brought Gairy back, released Gairy, to appeal to his followers to stop the actions that they were taking.
At the end of the day, Gairy gets what he's asking for. There's the increase in wages, there's better working conditions. So of course, he's seen as a savior by the people who would have been asking for those changes, wanting those changes, and never really getting them.
And it's from there onward, Gairy became the champion of the working class.
That period can be seen as the real watershed in the change from that post-slavery society, which had really not given full equal status to the majority of Grenadians. It was also the beginning. Later on, we would get universal adult suffrage in '51 that came to all of the Eastern Caribbean. So one could see Gairy's actions and what took place in Grenada as a way of bringing that about, you know. Also giving a voice to people who had remained voiceless for, you know, the whole 100 years since slavery ended. Because I think the goal of the plantation system was to keep workers on the plantation or attached to it in some way. And that was achieved for quite a bit, even though Grenadians actually even in the Eastern Caribbean, had more access to land. There's actually a greater land ownership among peasants in Grenada than most of the other islands, because places like Barbados had no land for people to access. That's why lots of Barbadians came to Grenada and became landowners of sorts. So 1951 was really the watershed that happened in Grenada in politics, and party politics developed as a result.
The formation of a political party was yet another defining moment in the history of Grenada, a moment that influenced the course of this island's history forever. Resilience of the Spice Isle continues next week at the same time as we make our way towards the peaceful overthrow of Eric Geary and the bloody demise of the revolution.